Peace, 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 peace. It's your noble Mufti A. Right Bay. We back again with the BBT Adept class reading lecture for today. And I'm overjoyed that you took out the time to grace us with your presence on today, to listen to little old me. And won't be before you long today by Allah's grace. But we have a compilation that was divinely prepared by yours truly. And today, with the help of the Holy Spirit, we're going to venture into a topic entitled The Fall of Man Unfolded. And this will just be more or less of a kind of a direct reading to give us some food for thought and to challenge some of the perspectives that we may have been groomed with growing up, right, in regards to a religious look at the fall of man, right, to a more metaphysical, Moorish perspective of the fall and how they contrast each other in a sense. But ultimately, it's for the edification of our spirit and adding to our education as we always seek knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, as we know the Holy Spirit leads and guide us, right, into all truth. So without further ado, family, thank you again for your presence. Let's begin BBT Adept class for today from the title, The Fall of Man Unfolded. Your brother, Mufti A. Right Bay. Let's go.
I'm a spirit speaking, truth seeking, heart reaching, knowledge leaking, seeds sowing, harvest reaping, man of neither means. I have yet to leave, I'm still breathing. To quit, I have no reason. I mean, I'm asleep, but I be trying to live my dream. I cannot even act if it's all easy. Either you gon' do it or you don't really. It ain't no in between. Baby, you can ask the sun, it's an everyday theme. Consistency in your routine is how you bring reality. Working like a slave, that's how I made this masterpiece. Living like a god, I lay at night, I rest in peace. They remember me, but I am not Haram or beef.
Peace, 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 peace. This is what we do. Let's see if it adds now. Boom. Here we go, right on the stage as we see it. So let's begin to go into this document, right? So prepared and compiled for the Burning Bush Tabernacle Science Temple and School by Mufti or Noble Mufti A. Right Bay, which is yours truly, right? So the fall of man unfolded. And as we talk about the fall of man, and we begin with the biblical perspective, the religious perspective that some of us may be familiar with, and then we'll transition as we go through and see how this may widen our perspective as we look at it from a holistic point of view. Islam. So, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Below, from Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia, and this is one caveat here, as Moors, we do not recommend, relying on any of our scholarly research using Wikipedia, right? So, but in this instance, we are highlighting the text below to further our discussion. Islam. So I'm going to begin. It says the fall of man, the fall of Adam, or simply the fall, is a term used in Christianity to describe the transition of the first man and woman from a state of innocent obedience to God to a state of guilty disobedience. The doctrine of the fall comes from a biblical interpretation of Genesis, the chapters 1 through 3, where at first Adam and Eve lived with God in the Garden of Eden, but what? The serpent tempted them into eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? Which God had forbidden. What happened after that? After doing so, they became what? Ashamed of their nakedness. And God expelled them from the garden to prevent them from eating from the tree of life and what? Becoming immortal, right? So for many Christian denominations, right? Let's continue to move on, right? So for many Christian denominations, the doctrine of the fall is closely related to that of the original sin, right? What is that? That they believe that the fall brought sin into the world, corrupting the entire natural world, including human nature, right? Causing all humans to be what? Born into original sin, a state from which they cannot attain eternal life, right? Without the grace of God, right? So for the Eastern Orthodox Church accepts the concept of the fall, but rejects the idea that the guilt of original sin is passed down through generations. Based in part on the passage of Ezekiel, the 18th chapter, the 20th verse, that says, a son is not guilty of the sins of his father. Calvinist Protestants believe that Jesus gave his life as a sacrifice for the elect, so they may be redeemed from their sin. Lapsarianism, understanding the logical order of God's decrees in relation to the fall, is divided by some Calvinists into subplarian Parisianism and prelapsarianism. Prelapsarianism or prelapsarian, right, or anti-lapsarian before the fall, and infralapsarian or sublapsarian or post-lapsarian after the fall, right? Now, when we take a look into this term, lapsarian, right? Let's see what let's see what we let's do a smart look, right? Boom, and let's see what it has for us here. Okay, so let's see, so we can get a good understanding of the term. Let's do what we do. Let's get a good understanding of that term. Let's look at this. Right, so sublapsarianism is a theological view closely related to infralapsarianism that describes the logical order of God's decrees regarding creation, the fall, and redemption. In this view, God first created humanity, then permitted the fall, and finally decreed to provide salvation for some, according to Theopedia, right? So let's close that, right? Now, let's begin to continue. The narrative of the Garden of Eden and the fall of man constitute a mythological tradition shared by all Abrahamic religions. How so? With a presentation more or less symbolic of Judeo-Christian morals and religious beliefs, which had an overwhelming impact on gender roles and sex differences, both in the Western and Islamic worlds. Unlike Christianity, Judaism and Islam don't have a concept of original sin. I'm going to say that again. Unlike Christianity, Judaism, and Islam have a concept of original sin. They don't have it, right? So, and instead have developed varying other interpretations of the Eden narrative. I think that was very interesting. And there's a lot to unpack there when we consider that, unlike Christianity, Judaism and Islam, they don't have that concept of original sin, or the biting of the apple, which then led to the original sin of all, right? So let's move on. Now, we just highlighted briefly, from a Wikipedia perspective, just the religious scope of looking at the phrase "the fall of man," and as it related to the Garden of Eden, right? To Adam and Eve, right? To a forbidden fruit, right? And then also to the barring them from eating from the tree of life so they wouldn't be immortal. So you got a lot of different pieces and parts going on, right? So what we're going to do now is venture into the Moorish Holy Quran, right? Chapter 11, where Jesus and Barata together, they read the sacred books. So this is where we have a Moorish perspective of the fall. And I want you to pay close attention to how Yahshua, Jesus, pictures that fall to Barata as they read the holy books. Islam. So chapter 11 of the Moorish Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America, Jesus and Barata together, they read the sacred books, right? So verse 1 begins. Among the Buddhist priests was one who saw a lofty wisdom in the words that Jesus spoke. It was Barato Orebu. Together, Jesus and Barata read the Jewish Psalms and prophets, read the Vedas and the Avistas and the wisdom of Gautama, right? And as they read and talked about the possibilities of man, Barata said, man is the marvel of the universe. He is part of everything, for he has been a living thing on every plane of life. Time was, or time when man was not, or time was when man was not, right? And then he was a bit of formless substance in the mold of time, and then a protoplasm, right? By universal law, all things tend upward to a state of perfectness. The protoplasm evolved, becoming worm, the reptile, bird, and beast, and then at last it reached the form of man. Now, man himself is mind, and mind is here to gain perfection by experience. And mind is often manifest in fleshly form and in the form best suited to its growth. So mind may manifest as worm, as bird, or beast, or man. The time will come when everything of life will be evolved unto the state of perfect man. And after man is man in perfectness, he will evolve to higher forms of life. Now watch this. This is the perspective that Barato gave to Jesus as they both read. And this was Barato's perspective of man. I wanted you to keep in your hippocampus what we spoke about the fall of man according to the Christian perspective, right? So now listen to Jesus' response to Barato, right? He said, now, and Jesus said, Barato Arebu, who taught you this? That man, that mind, watch this, which is the man, may manifest in flesh of beast or bird or creeping thing. Barato said, from times which man remembers not, our priests have told us so, and so we know. And Jesus said, enlightened Orebu, are you a mastermind and do not know that man knows naught by being told? Which basically means that you don't know, right? Anything by being told. So he said, man may believe what others say, right? But thus he never knows. If man would know, he what? Must himself be what he knows. And he goes on to say, do you remember, Arebu, when you were an ape, a bird, or worm? Now, if you have no better proving of your plea than that the priests have told you so, you do not know. You simply guess. Regard not then what any man has said. Let us forget the flesh, and go with mind into the land of fleshless things. Mind never does forget. And backwards through the ages, masterminds can what? Trace themselves, and thus they know. Time never was when man was not. That which begins will have an end. If man was not, the time will come when he will not exist. From Allah's own record book, we read, the triune Allah breathed forth and stood 7 spirits before his face. The Hebrews call these 7 spirits Elohim, and these are they who, in their boundless power, created everything that is or was. These spirits of the triune Allah moved upon the boundless space, and 7 others were, and every other had its form of life. These forms of life were but the thought of Allah, clothed in the substance of their ether planes. Men call these ether planes the planes of protoplast, 1, of earth, 2, of plant, 3, of beast, 4, of man, 5, of angel and cherubim. Well, you got 6 and 7. So 7 planes, do we recall? These planes, with all their teeming thoughts of Allah, are never seen by eyes of man in flesh, composed of substance far too fine for fleshly eyes to see, and still they constitute the soul of things. And with the eyes of soul, all creatures see these ether planes and all forms of life. Because all forms of life on every plane are thoughts of Allah, all creatures think, and every creature is possessed of will, and in his measure has the power to choose. And in their native planes, all creatures are supplied with nourishment from the ethers of their plane. And so it was with every living thing until the will became a sluggish will. And then the ethers of the protoplast, the earth, the plant, the beast, the man, begin to vibrate very slow. The ethers all became more dense, and all the creatures of these planes were clothed with coarser garbs of flesh, which men can what? See. And thus this coarser manifest, right? This coarser manifest, which men call physical, appeared. And this is what is called the fall of man. Now I'm gonna pause for a second. So in verse 31 of the chapter 11, right, where we see here Yahshua giving us a pictorial of the fall of creation, if you will, man descending through the planes of creation until where he comes to this coarser or grosser matter, right, from a ethereal, or what you say spiritual essence, right, down into a fleshly coarser garb, right, where men can see, right? And this is where the physical appeared, right? So, and this is what man called the fall of man. Now look at these two perspectives. So one, we have from the Moorish Holy Quran, the perspective of the fall regarding the planes of creation, right? And man descending, right? Or what you would call involution or incarnating into the body, right? From a spiritual essence down to a grosser essence where the garb of of flesh becomes physical and hardened, and one can see, right? Some may even classify this as crucifixion or being on the cross, if you will, because now from a spiritual perspective, one descends to be fixed, cross, if you will, in the body, right? Where the ethers at that point became dense, right? So we have the fall through planes of manifest, or to the plane of manifest through these different planes of creation, plant, protoplast, beast, from, from cherubim, seraphim. These are all planes of creation that man, as the writer brings forth here in the Moorish Holy Quran, as descending or falling, if you will, right? And I said, now we juxtapose this to the Christian point of view of the fall of man being due to disobedience, right? And this was now what? In the Christian perspective, the fall was a fall of knowledge, fall out of the what you would call the perfection of God, right? So these are two different pictorials that we're getting. And what this is doing, hopefully, is giving us a pause to think now and to use our mind's eye for the Holy Spirit to give us a revelation, right? So as I move forward, as it reads, now watch this. I'm going to just start at verse 30 again. It says, the ethers became more dense, and all the creatures of the plains were clothed with coarser barbs of flesh, which men can see. And thus this coarser manifest, which men call physical, appeared. And this is what is called the fall of man. Watch this. But man fell not alone, for protoplast and earth and plant and beast were all included in the fall. Watch this. The angels in the cherubim fell not. Why? Because their wills were ever strong. And so they held the ethers of their planes in harmony with Allah, right? Now, when the ethers reach the rate of atmosphere, and all the creatures of these planes must get their food from where? The atmosphere. That's when the conflict came in. Watch this. And that which the finite man called survival of the beast became the law, right? So here in my environment and in my atmosphere, I now have this concept, or what, of survival of what? The fittest, or the beast, or what we connotate the best, right? Who's the head of the food chain, so to speak, right? Now, what did this bring about? The stronger ate the bodies of the weaker manifest. And here is where the carnal law of evolution had its rise. And now man, in his utter shamelessness, strikes down and eats the beast. Watch this. The beast consumes the plant. The plant thrives on the earth, right? Then what? The earth absorbs the protoplast, right? Now, in yonder kingdom of the soul. Now, this is pre-fall, before the fall, if you will, right? And yonder kingdom of the soul, this carnal evolution is not known. Why, right? You don't have to eat the weaker manifest. Why? Because, and the great work of masterminds is to restore that heritage of men, right? That ethereal, if you will, that kingdom of the soul, right? Where man will regain his lofty estate, Islam. So now watch this. The work of masterminds is to restore the heritage of man. This is you and I here. This is our work. What? To bring him back. Come on now. To his estate that he has lost. Right? So when he again will live upon what? the ethers of his native plane. The thoughts of Allah change not. The manifest of life on every plane unfold into perfection of their kind, right? And as the thought of Allah could never die, there is no death to any being of the seven ethers of the seven spirits of the Triune Allah, right? And so an earth is never planned. Come on. A beast or bird or creeping thing is never man. And man is not and cannot be a beast. Watch this. And man is not and cannot be a beast, a bird, or creeping thing. The time will come when all these seven manifests will what? Be absorbed, right? So that's what? Back into the one, right? From which they descended. And man and beast and plant and earth and protoplast will what? Be redeemed. Barata was amazed at the wisdom of the Jewish sage. We're talking about Yahshua, the Messiah, talking about Jesus here. He was amazed at this, what Yahshua had revealed to him, right? Now, he said, now Vidyapati, wisest of the Indian sages, chief of Temple Kapavistu, he heard what Yahshua was saying, talking about the fall, right? And what did he have to say? He said, Barata spake to Jesus of the original man and heard the answer of the Hebrew prophet. And he said, you priests of Kapavistu, right? Hear me speak. We stand today upon the crest of time. 6 times ago, a master soul was born who gave a glorious light to man. And now a master sage stands here in the temple Kapavistu. The Hebrew prophet is the rising star of wisdom, right? Now these are titles that the priest is giving onto Yahshua, onto Jesus, right? Call him a Hebrew prophet, right? A rising star of wisdom. Come on now, deified, right? What he said he brings to us a knowledge of the secrets things of Allah. And all the world will hear his words, will heed his words, and what? Glorify his name. You priests of Temple Kapavistu, stay, be still, and listen when he speaks. He is the living oracle of Allah. Another title, living oracle of Allah. And all the priests, what? Gave thanks. Isa, Ibn Mariam, right? And praised the Buddha of enlightenment. Islam. So we have an excerpt that we're going to conclude with, but how fascinating was the contrast, right, of the Christian point of view when we talk about the fall of man versus what the Moorish Holy Quran brings to us from a esoteric perspective or metaphysical perspective when it speaks of the fall of man, and gives us a perspective of the fall of creation at the same time. Very, very marvelous, should I say. As we move on and kind of get to the conclusion of the lecture today, I will move forward with an excerpt from Dr. Elihu in Pleasant Bay, right? As we know, as a swift angel, number one, and his perspective, high honors and praise, his perspective on the idea of the fall of man, and in fact, how it relates to man's relationship to the Creator as well as to himself, right? So this is how we tie this all in a bow by Allah's grace, right? And this is also combining a level of remembrance to where man has his origin, right? Because the fall, of course, is, right, what? A falling away from, however you were to put it, right? But now this is a remembering, how do we come back now, right? So as we move on, Prophet Muhammad taught the highest degree of prayer. And this is coming back to the oneness again after the fall, right? So the ritual of facing an eastwardly direction during prayer did not begin with Muslims, right, of modern day Islam, right? Well, Muslims of modern day Islam. This is a human practice that dates back originally to the fall, watch this, of Isa and Isha, right? Or Adam and Eve. I'm going to repeat that sentence. The ritual of facing an easterly direction during prayer did not begin with Muslims of modern day Islam, right? This is a human practice that dates back originally to the fall of Isa and Isha, who are respectively Adam and Eve, right? From the grace of the garden into being humans. Watch that, fall. Prior to the fall, when they were gods and goddesses, they naturally met Allah's commands through their heart's will of higher consciousness, right? So see third eye, right? So the fall of man began its descent from the light, or what? The truth, and what? His, in search of the light, journey into the Maya of human knowledge. It was then man's highest ideals became his God, right? And in the time, the sun, Allah's noblest image, became his most wishful source of the light and direction of prayer. So when you're looking at the light as the most noblest image of Allah, or God's creation, in man's mind at the time, that would be where he were to direct his attention to what? Get back to that oneness, or to make amends, or to come back to that estate after the fall, right? It makes sense, right? So, and in the time, the sun's noblest image, right, or Allah's, the sun, Allah's noblest image, became his most wishful source of the light and direction of prayer, right? So that makes sense. So it was the ancient Cometians that made a scientific study, watch this, which discriminated between the worshiping of Ra, right, or what, the sun, and Hotep, the conscious realization that exists between man as God and the light, which is the entrance to the maker of both he and the sun, right? We'll repeat that. It was the ancient Cometians that made a scientific study which discriminated between the worshiping of Ra, the sun, and Hotep, the conscious realization that exists between man as God and the light, which is the entrance to the maker of both he and the sun. The old tribes of Israel later misnomered Jews and Hebrews, right, which revived the outwardly direction or prayer directions plumbed perpendicular to the sun to a horizontal landmark, what? Erected by man. What is it? Therefore, they proclaim their city of Jerusalem as what? Holy, and faced it to sanctify their prayers. This remained a custom for nearly 1,000 years until the advent of the great prophet Muhammad. The ritual of which we say, or the ritual which way should men or man face in prayer, surfaced as a misunderstanding in Medina, right? Originally called Yathrib, the city of excellence, between the Jews and Muslim converts of Muhammad. Since, peace be upon him, since the Meccans, Israelites, and many other nationals in that region customarily faced Jerusalem to pray, it was the Jews that assumed, because they had given the new Muslim refuge and equal rights of citizenship, that they would face the Qibla, right? Following tradition. But Muhammad, under Allah's command, was to take the Muslims into the ancient direction of prayer, right? But was this new direction of prayer ordained through Muhammad, the way of the prophets, or to face the Kaaba in Mecca as opposed to the Qibla of Jerusalem? First, it must be remembered that Muhammad was a member of the agnostic order of worshippers called Hunafa, or Hanif, before becoming directed by the angel Gabriel. A Hunafa was not a tribesman, but a seeker of truth, upright, by way of consciousness, as also when he was as way of consciousness, right, as different from idol worshippers. Watch that. In fact, Hanif meant those who turn away from idolatry. Also, when he was able to see the form of the angel Gabriel from where the voice of Allah came, when Muhammad was on the Hira mountain, it was what? In the shape of a man, standing in the sky just above the horizon. The ancient Egyptians, from which most angels, i.e. Michael, Gabriel, etc., derive, always use the word horizon to differentiate between higher consciousness and human thinking. Or, as Drew Ali simplified this lofty state to his Moors, as the nearest place to meet Allah is in the heart. The angels always look indigenous to Eden and can do more than carry messages from Allah. There is infinite grace in the art of meditation. Here again, meditation is realized as the most direct prayer way of all the prophets, angels, Muslims, gurus, and masterminds of all times and climes. Meditation. This is key. Why? For every prophet raised from among a nation of people always attempted to teach their followers to be what? Like them, especially to pray just like them. Although, as in the generalities of men, to be ignorant rarely did more than one or few conquer Maya, right? The indwelling ignorance and ego of the carnal mind, right? Enough to meet Allah. This holds true for Moses, Abraham, Yahshua, Muhammad, and Noble Jew Ali. These prophets usually gave their people an alternative method of prayer linked somewhere between a tradition they were accustomed to and linked to the ancient direct way through fearless consciousness. Without the interceding of a middleman, ritual, or form, they prayed best. So I want to close there, but this is really to be continued, because what the writer was giving us a glimpse into is that the fall of man caused there to be a yearning, if you will, to get back to oneness, right? And so when man saw himself away from Allah at this point, if you will, or falling out of that relationship, the one noblest image that he began to see right away was the sun. This sun would then to symbolize how he were to direct himself back to his lofty estate right after the fall. So we're beginning now to create a picture, right, in your mind's that the fall isn't or wasn't simply an act of disobedience, as some may have placed it, but in fact, it was or is an evolutionary journey that the soul partakes to bring us back to oneness with our Creator. Islam. Listen, family, it's been a pleasure just to walk through this by the grace of Allah and have us, give us some food for thought, and, excuse the technical difficulties if you see some of the video being delayed. Definitely blame it on my Wi-Fi, of course. We will, by Allah's grace, think be better next time. Islam. So I thank you for your presence on this Adept lecture reading. Come on. Shout out to the BBT tribe and illustrious Sheikh Kyrie. Grace and peace be among them. And listen, we can't have unity without you. and I. And you come first. So it was a plum pleasing pleasure to be in your presence. Until we meet again, let's jump into our studies. Let's make time for meditation. And let's love on each other. Peace and love with brother Noble Musi, A right there, signing off. Grace and peace.
I'm a spirit speaking, truth seeking, heart reaching, knowledge leaking, seed sowing, harvest reaping, man of neither meaning. I have yet.
mypdfbooks.com. That's books with a Z.
Once again, this broadcast has been brought to you by mypdfbooks.com. That's books with a Z, where reading fundamental. Also brought to you by bindedbooks.com, where treasures are bound. Be sure to get all of your teas at My Eye Son's Teas, the tea of teas, divinely prepared at herbsofmyeye.com. Be sure to check out all of those musical stylings by Brian Hicks Spade at bhspademusic.com. For your everyday items and religious regalia, be sure to check out morrishaberdasher.com. And for that everyday especial Morris drip, be sure to check out morsachi.com. And all of these companies are powered by ALO Design Pros. Design your online business strategy today.
No such thing as failure, baby. Don't forget who made you. You can't be thinking minor when you need to be thinking major. They made you think they